The translation device was still running when I picked it up. It sat on Admiral Cole's desk, small and silver, the size of a thumb, looping a single sentence in 17 alien languages. The alien diplomat who had recorded it was dead, not killed, not in any way I could explain to a review board. Just gone 3 hours after delivering it, like something inside him had simply stopped wanting to continue. I pressed play. The device said in a flat, mechanical tone, "They are not soldiers. They are something for which we have no word." I set it down. I picked up my coffee. I drank half of it standing there in the gray light of 400 hours aboard the carrier ship Perseverance, and I felt nothing in particular, which is how I know I was actually feeling quite a lot. My name is Commander Yara Vasquez. I am 34 years old. I grew up in East Los Angeles, in a house with one working window and a mother who believed that complaining was a form of weakness. I enlisted at 18, made sergeant by 22, lost my first crew at 26, and have spent the 8 years since then doing the kind of work that does not appear in recruitment advertisements. That morning, I was being promoted. Admiral Cole sat across from me with the expression of a man who had rehearsed this conversation many times and had decided, at the last moment, that no version of it was going to go well. He was 60, built like old architecture, and he had a habit of folding his hands on his desk when he was about to say something he personally disagreed with. His hands were folded. "The Galactic Concord," he said, "has made a formal request. I heard. You heard they want us to stop expanding. I heard they want us to stop existing so loudly. There's a difference." He looked at me for a moment. The diplomatic team spent 4 months negotiating our response. What did we offer them? You and 11 others. I put the coffee down. The Galactic Concord was 34 spacefaring civilizations, the oldest of which had been traveling between stars before humanity had figured out the wheel. They had laws, trade routes, a shared language built from 600 component dialects, and a unified defense framework that had kept the galaxy quiet for 11,000 years. They had contacted us 40 years ago. 39 of those years had been spent in negotiation, diplomacy, and mutual cultural exchange. The 40th year had been spent watching us. From what I understood, the watching was what had scared them. The Apex unit was humanity's formal answer to their concern. 12 people, selected from every branch of military and scientific service, representing the full range of what humans could do when pointed at a problem. The Concord had asked us to reduce our presence in the outer systems. We had said, politely, that we would send a small team as a gesture of cooperation instead. The Concord had accepted this, which told me they were either very trusting or very tired. "Why me?" I said. It was not really a question. Cole unfolded his hands. "Your psychological profile, your field record, He paused. The review board used the word adaptability several times. Adaptability. They also used the word unconventional, also several times. That's a kind word for it." He slid the commission papers across the desk. I looked at them. Standard format. My name at the top in clean block letters, a line at the bottom for signature. "Commander Vasquez," Cole said, "this is the most important assignment in human history." "Sure," I said. I signed. The pen was running out of ink halfway through my last name. I pressed harder and finished it anyway. The V in Vasquez came out thin, almost invisible, like it was already reconsidering itself. I picked up the translation device again on my way out, played it one more time in the corridor, alone, the ship humming around me like a kept promise. "They are not soldiers. They are something for which we have no word." Down the corridor, past the crew quarters, past the mess hall, past the observation window where 3 moons hung in the dark like they had nowhere better to be, I walked to my bunk and sat on the edge of it and thought about the Kepler-12. I did not let myself think about them for long. I never do. There is a gap between being afraid and going anyway. Humans live in that gap. We have always lived in that gap. We built our first fires there, and our first cities, and our first ships, and every single thing we have ever pointed at the dark and called progress. The conquered, from what I could tell, had never understood this. They kept looking for the mechanism, the calculation we ran before we moved, the risk assessment, the committee, the vote, the waiting. There was no mechanism. There was just the gap. And we walked into it every time, the way water finds a crack, not because we were reckless, not because we were brave, but because standing still for us had always felt like a slower way of dying. I set an alarm for 2 hours. I did not sleep. I lay there in the dark and listened to the ship breathe, and somewhere in the walls of it, the translation device was still running, probably, in its 17 languages, telling whoever would listen the same thing it had always been saying. We have no word. We have no word. We have no word. I closed my eyes. Outside, the stars did not move. They never do. It just looks that way when you are. The room they put us in was clearly designed to make us feel small. It was 60 feet high, built from some pale stone material that hummed very softly when you stood near it, and had a view through 3 curved windows of a gas giant and its 4 moons. The table in the center was long enough to seat 30, and they had placed 12 chairs at it, all in a row, with enough space between them to suggest that whoever arranged this had watched a lot of human diplomatic footage and had completely misunderstood the social mechanics. I was the last to arrive. 11 faces turned toward me when I walked in, which is the closest I have come to a sincere greeting in years. Kevin Akafer was asleep at the table, upright, arms crossed, head tipped slightly to the left. His Concord medical file, which I had read on the shuttle, described his resting state as physiologically indistinguishable from cessation of biological function, followed by full operational recovery. The file had flagged this as anomalous. Kevin called it a gift. He could sleep through a decompression alarm and wake up 4 seconds later ready to sprint. He was currently snoring at a diplomatic briefing. Beside him, Leon Petrov was eating. He always eating. Not from hunger exactly. I had served with Leon for 6 years, and I had come to understand that food was how he processed anxiety, the same way other people pace or tap or chew their nails. His Concord file said he continues operating under conditions that should produce cessation of function, which was the most scientific way anyone had ever described the fact that Leon simply refused to stop. He had been shot twice, poisoned once, and had his left arm rebuilt from the elbow down after a mission in the outer belt that we were technically not supposed to discuss. He was currently eating a compressed protein bar with the focused dedication of a man completing important work. Dr. Lena Marsh sat at the far end of the table, not looking at anyone, making notes on a small handheld device. She was the only non-combat specialist in the unit, a xenobiologist who had spent 12 years studying alien communication systems before the military had noticed that she could read things no translation algorithm had ever successfully processed. Her Concord file said she was the one who names things before the named are aware of being named. I had read that 3 times and was still working out exactly how frightened I should be by it. She had dark hair, cut short, and the habit of going completely still when she was thinking, not tense, just still, the way a held breath is still. I watched her for 4 seconds when I walked in, which was 2 seconds longer than I usually allow myself to look at anything I do not yet understand. The others introduced themselves in the efficient way that people do when they have all read each other's files already, and are simply confirming that the files were accurate. Nadia Osai, combat engineer, who had the permanent expression of someone who had already identified 3 structural weaknesses in every room she entered. Ray Duncan, communications, who spoke 6 languages and had the careful stillness of a man who spent most of his time listening to things other people could not hear. Clara Webb, medic, who smiled easily and had hands that never shook, which sounds simple until you know the kind of situations in which she had been required to use them. 7 others, each carrying their history in the way they sat and the way they did not sit, in what they reached for when they were uncertain, and what they said when they thought nobody was paying attention. I sat at the head of the table. Kevin woke up, looked around, looked at me. "Are we starting?" he said. "We started," I said. He nodded, accepting this, and went back to sleep for another 4 minutes. The Concord liaison arrived at 900 exactly. His name was Ambassador Cell, and he was Vekhani, 6-limbed. The top 2 held in what I had learned was a formal greeting posture, his skin producing a soft blue-white light that shifted in tone the way a human face shifts in expression. He was roughly 2 meters tall, moved with the measured precision of someone who had spent a long time learning to move in spaces built for a different body type, and had clearly prepared for this meeting with significant care. He still looked faintly like a man who had accepted an outcome he could not prevent. He sat at the table, arranged his limbs, looked at Kevin, who was asleep again, and said nothing about it. "Ambassador," I said, "thank you for making the trip." "Commander Vasquez." His translated voice was smooth, slightly formal. "Thank you for agreeing to hear what I have to say." Leon opened another protein bar. The sound was very loud in the quiet room. Cell placed a small projector on the table and activated it. A star map expanded above us, slow and 3-dimensional, the outer systems rendered in pale blue, our own territory in white, and beyond both of them, at the far edge of anything any human ship had ever charted, a cluster of coordinates marked in a deep red that I had never seen used in a standard Concord display. 6 weeks ago, Cell said, a signal was detected in the outer fringe, at these coordinates. Detected by whom? Ray asked. By every monitoring array in Concord space, simultaneously. The room was quiet. How long had it been transmitting? Lena asked, still looking at her notes. Cell's light shifted. Something in the blue deepened. Our analysis suggests, he said carefully, that it began transmitting approximately the same moment humanity made first contact with the Concord. Nobody moved. Kevin was awake. I had not seen him open his eyes, but he was awake. The 34-member species of the Concord, Cell continued, reviewed this signal collectively. We ran it through every analytical system available. We debated for 4 weeks. And then, I said, and then we voted not to investigate it. Leon put the protein bar down. That, more than anything, told me how the room had shifted. You're sending us, I said. We are offering you the opportunity, Cell said carefully. Is there a difference? His light did a thing I had not seen before. A brief, almost imperceptible dimming across his entire body, like a candle in a draft. Commander, he said, 34 civilizations, 11,000 years of combined spacefaring history. Every one of them looked at those coordinates and decided collectively that the correct response was to not go there. He looked at me with his 4 forward-facing eyes, which in Vekhani body language indicated the highest possible degree of sincerity. I informed my superiors, he said, that I suspected humans would reach a different conclusion. I looked at the red coordinates on the map. How long is the flight? 11 days at standard FTL. What kind of signal is it? That, Cell said, is part of what we do not know. Lena looked up from her notes for the first time since he had started talking. What kind of signal do you think it is? She said. The room noticed the difference between those 2 questions. Cell noticed it too. His light shifted again, something warmer moving through the blue. We have a theory, he said. He did not offer it. I let the silence sit for 4 seconds, which is usually enough. It is not a distress call, he said finally. It is not a navigational signal. It is not a warning. He folded his upper limbs, the gesture that I would later learn was grief, though I did not know that yet. Our best translation suggests, he said, that it is a counting signal. Counting what? Clara asked. Not what, Lena said quietly, still looking at her device, her voice very calm and very level. Who? Nobody answered. Outside the 3 curved windows, the gas giant turned in the dark, slow and indifferent, its 4 moons tracing their fixed and patient paths around it like they had been doing this for 1 billion years, and intended to do it for 1 billion more. I looked at the red coordinates. I looked at my 11 people. Kevin met my eyes across the table and gave me the smallest possible nod, which in 6 years of working together I had learned meant, yes, obviously, what are we waiting for? I turned back to Sel. We'll go, I said. He was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said, I know. We dropped out of FTL 11 days later into a system that felt wrong before any of our instruments said it was. I noticed it first in my shoulders, a tightness, the kind that lives just below conscious awareness, the kind your body registers before your brain catches up. Ray noticed it next. He stopped talking mid-sentence and tilted his head slightly, the way he does when he is listening to something nobody else can hear yet. Leon put down his food, which at this point in our mission familiarity had become my single most reliable indicator that a situation had shifted from unusual to serious. The system had no name in any Concord database, no catalog entry, no survey flag, no navigational marker. Human databases had already given it a name, because that is what we do. We name things before we understand them, and sometimes before we have even decided whether we are going to survive them. We had called it Vega's Rest, after Lieutenant Commander Helena Vega, who had died during the mission that first detected this region of space from a long-range probe 6 years ago. Helena would have hated it. She had hated most honors given to dead people, on the grounds that dead people could not object to them. I liked her a lot. 3 planets, 1 dim orange star, no signals on any frequency we could detect, and the structure. It was 41 kilometers long. Not a ship, not a station, nothing that matched any architectural classification in any database we carried. It was dark, no running lights, no power emissions, nothing radiating on thermal or electromagnetic scans. And yet Leon, who has an instinct for heat the way some people have an instinct for rain, said, "It's warm inside." "How warm?" I asked. He looked at his scanner, human comfortable. I stood at the observation window and looked at it for a while. 41 kilometers of dark, silent structure, sitting in an unmapped system at coordinates that had begun broadcasting a signal the moment humanity joined the galactic community, warm on the inside and waiting. "Sel," I said over the comm. The ambassador's reply came after a longer pause than the signal delay accounted for. "Yes, Commander. We're looking at it now." "Yes. You're not coming aboard." "No. Can you tell me why?" Another pause. "My species," he said carefully, "has a concept that does not translate exactly. The closest equivalent in your language would be something like a place that has been expecting you, a place that has already decided what you are before you arrive. And your people do not go to those places." "We have learned," he said quietly, "not to." I thought about that. "All right," I said, "stay with the ship. We'll check in every 30 minutes. "Commander," his voice was very steady, "please be careful." I appreciated that he said it, and I did not tell him that careful was not really the correct framework for what we were about to do. We were going in because the structure was there, and we were here, and the signal had been waiting for us specifically. And in my experience, when something has been waiting for you specifically, the only productive response is to show up and find out what it wants. We went in through an opening in the hall that was clearly designed to be an entrance, because it was exactly the right size, and positioned exactly where you would position a door if you had built a structure intended to receive visitors. This did not make me feel better. The interior was dark for approximately 8 seconds after we crossed the threshold, and then the walls began to glow. Not bright, not aggressive. A soft, steady amber light that built from nothing, like sunrise compressed into 4 seconds, coming from no visible source, from everywhere at once. Nadia said very quietly, "The light source is in the walls themselves." "Bioluminescent?" Clara asked. "Not biological," Nadia said. She scanned again. "Not mechanical either. At least not any mechanics I have a word for." We walked. The corridors were wide enough for 6 people side by side, and the ceilings were high enough that I could not easily judge their height. The construction material was not stone, and not metal, and not anything in our reference library. Smooth to the touch, warm, not uncomfortably warm, just warm the way a room is warm when someone has been living in it. Kevin ran his hand along one wall as we walked. "It remembers the right temperature," he said. "What does that mean?" Ray asked. Kevin shrugged. "I don't know, it just feels like it does." We found the first room after 12 minutes of walking. It was circular, roughly 30 meters across, and the walls from floor to ceiling were covered in carved markings. Not random, not decorative. Structured, layered, dense with what Lena would later describe as the highest information concentration she had ever seen in a physical medium. Lena walked to the nearest wall and pressed her palm flat against it. She stood like that for a long time. "Lena," I said, "give me a minute." I gave her 4. She pulled her hand back and looked at it, then looked at me, and her expression was the one she wears when she has understood something that she wishes she had not. "It is a record," she said, "a war archive. These are histories, battles, species, timelines. All of it, carved in layers, each layer older than the one above it. The oldest sections," she looked back at the wall, "I cannot date them precisely, but the star formations referenced in the astronomical records here correspond to configurations that no longer exist. Several of these stars have been dark for millions of years." Nobody said anything. "This structure," Lena continued, "was built by a civilization that wanted to preserve something. They did not want it forgotten." "Preserved what?" Ray asked. "A war," she said. "A very long one, fought across most of the galaxy, and a record of the civilizations involved." She moved to a different section of wall. Her eyes moved fast, reading. "The builders recorded every species that participated, named them, categorized them." She paused. "There is a specific category set apart from the rest, marked differently. These marks here," she pointed to a set of deeply carved symbols that repeated across 3 separate sections of the room, "they correspond to a designation. I think the closest translation would be something like, the ones who could not be accounted for." "Accounted for how?" I asked. "Predicted, measured, contained." She looked at me. "The ones who fell outside every model. The ones who could not be negotiated with, not because they were hostile, but because they operated by principles that did not exist in any other species framework." "How many civilizations got that designation?" Leon asked. Lena turned back to the wall, counted. 8, she said. "What happened to them?" She was quiet for a moment. 7 were quarantined. "And the 8th?" The amber light in the room was steady, warm, patient. "The 8th," Lena said, "was never found." Leon had been very still for a while. He looked at me across the room, and his face had the expression he gets when a situation has clarified itself in a direction he was hoping it would not. "We are the 9th, he said. Not a question. The walls agreed, which they did by beginning to glow brighter. It started at the section nearest to where I was standing and spread outward from there, moving across the carvings like light on water, reaching the far walls and the ceiling and the floor, until the entire room was lit from every surface, warm and full and steady. Nadia's scanner went quiet. Ray put his hand on the nearest wall. It is responding to us, he said. I know, I said. It recognizes us specifically. I know. The light continued building, not to blinding, not to threatening, just to full. Like the structure had been holding its breath for a very long time and had finally exhaled. Kevin looked up at the ceiling. That is either very good, he said, or very bad. It is probably both, Lena said. I pressed my comm. Cell. The signal delay was longer than 11 days of FTL should have produced. When his voice came through, it was even more careful than usual. Commander Vasquez, you need to see what we have found. A pause. Is it what I think it is? I looked at the walls, at 8 designations for 8 civilizations that had existed outside every framework the galaxy had built to understand things, at a structure built by a dead species that had wanted this moment preserved, at my 11 people, standing in amber light that had not existed until we walked through the door. Probably, I said, but come anyway. Commander. Cell. A longer pause. The Concord, he said slowly, is going to need a full report. Sure, I said, I will write them a nice one. Cell came aboard the structure, but he stood in the entrance corridor and did not move further in. He stood there with his upper limbs folded inward and his bioluminescence turned off, which I had never seen before. He looked smaller without the light, quieter, like a lamp that had decided to stop being a lamp for a while. I had learned by that point that for Vekhani, going dark meant grief. I did not ask him about it yet. We brought him the recordings instead. Lena's translations, Nadia's structural scans, Ray's signal analysis, all of it compiled into a report that I had written in plain language, because I have found that plain language is harder to reinterpret than technical language when someone is motivated to reinterpret things. He reviewed it in the corridor, standing very still, reading with 2 of his 4 forward-facing eyes while the other 2 remained on me. When he finished, he was quiet for a long time. You understand what this archive represents, he said finally. 8 civilizations the galaxy could not account for, I said. 7 quarantined, 1 gone. Yes. And the structure was broadcasting a counting signal, I said, from the exact moment we joined the Concord. Yes. So it was waiting to see if there would be a 9th. Cell's body produced a very faint light, not the warm blue of his formal state, something cooler, uncertain. Commander Vasquez, he said, I need to tell you something that I was not authorized to tell you when we began this mission. I had been expecting something like this. Go ahead, I said. The Concord has been conducting a vote, he said. A formal classification vote regarding humanity. It has been running for 11 years. This mission was, he paused, the final data collection phase. The corridor was very quiet. Behind me, I could feel my team not moving. 11 people, holding still, the way experienced people hold still when they are listening to something they need to hear every word of. What were the terms of the vote? I asked. 2 options, Cell said. First option, humanity is classified as a developing civilization requiring standard integration protocols, full Concord membership, phased expansion rights. And the second option? The second option, Cell said carefully, uses a term that does not translate well. The designation from this archive, the ones who could not be accounted for, the Concord has its own version of this category. It is older than the archive. It predates the war this structure was built to record. What do you call it? Unmeasured, he said. A civilization classified as unmeasured is one that cannot be predicted, cannot be contained, cannot be integrated by any standard protocol, because its fundamental operating principles fall outside every model the Conquered has developed in 11,000 years. What happens to an unmeasured civilization? Cell's light shifted. Quarantine, he said. Monitored containment. No expansion rights. No conquered membership. No contact beyond a single designated liaison. The words sat in the corridor between us. Quarantine. 7 civilizations in that archive. 7 designations. 7 fates. And the vote, I said. What were we supposed to do or not do during this mission to swing it one way or the other? Cell looked at me with all 4 forward eyes. If you had assessed the signal, determined it was unknown and potentially dangerous, and returned to conquered space without investigating further, he said, the vote would have closed in favor of standard integration. I let a moment pass. But we didn't do that, I said. No, he said. You determined it was unknown and potentially dangerous, and you went in immediately, with no environmental suits rated for unknown interior conditions, no tactical backup, and he glanced at Leon, food supplies that were clearly personal in nature. Leon looked briefly at his bag, looked up, said nothing. The vote result, I said. Has it come in? Cell reached into a pouch at his side and produced a small device, which he held for a moment before handing it to me. It was a conquered transmission seal, 34 emblems pressed into a single record, which meant unanimous, which meant every single member species of the conquered had agreed. I looked at it for a while. Then I handed it back. What does it say? I asked. Humanity has been classified, he said, but not as unmeasured. I waited. The classification committee, Cell said, determined that the existing designation was insufficient. Unmeasured describes a civilization that cannot be stopped. The committee felt this did not fully capture the relevant distinction. What distinction? Unmeasured civilizations, Cell said, cannot be stopped. Humanity, the committee concluded, has not yet tried to stop anything. The concern is not what you will do. The concern is what you will be without apparent awareness that you are being it. He produced the record again and pointed to a line of conquered text that I could not read. The new designation, he said, is apex inherent. It is the first new classification created in 4,000 years. What does it mean? It means, Cell said slowly, that you are not a threat because you are dangerous. You are a concern because you are fundamentally, constitutionally, at your deepest structural level yourselves. And there is no model in existence that has ever successfully predicted what that leads to. I nodded once. And what, I said, does apex inherent classification entail, practically? Restricted expansion rights, enhanced monitoring, limited conquered access. He paused. Effectively, a form of managed containment that would allow the conquered to observe while preventing further. No, I said. The corridor was very quiet. Cell looked at me. No, I said again, calmly, in the same tone I use for reports and briefings and ordinary logistical discussions. We are not being managed or contained. We are not accepting restricted rights. And we are not being classified by 34 civilizations in a vote that we were not invited to participate in. Commander, the vote was unanimous and binding under conquered law. Under conquered law, I said. We are not conquered members yet. You told me yourself that membership was conditional on the classification outcome. So the vote was conducted on a civilization that was not yet subject to the law being applied. Cell was quiet. Behind me, Ray made a very small sound, which I recognized as his version of being impressed. The conquered made an offer, I said. 12 of us, representing humanity as a gesture of cooperation, a goodwill mission. We came, we found something genuinely significant, and we reported it honestly. If the conquered's response to that is to restrict and contain us, then we will decline the relationship and return to developing our own. You cannot simply decline a conquered classification. Cell, I looked at him. We found the archive. We know about the 8. We know about the quarantine. We know about the one that was never found. He was very still. We did not find evidence that the quarantine worked, I said. The coroner held that thought for a moment. We also know, I continued, that this structure was built by a civilization that clearly understood something important enough to preserve it for millions of years. They went to an extraordinary amount of trouble to leave this record, which means they considered the information worth keeping. Yes, Sel said carefully. So the message of this archive is not quarantine the unpredictable ones and everything will be fine. The message is, here is what happened the last time someone tried that. Here is how long it took. Here is what it cost. Sel's light came back slowly, the warm blue returning from somewhere cold. What are you proposing, Commander? He said. A seat at the table, I said. A real one. Full membership, full rights, full access. In exchange, we agree to transparent communication, shared jurisdiction in expansion zones, and an open-door policy for conquered observers on human ships. The conquered will not agree to full membership under these circumstances. Then we will build our own table, I said, and you will spend the next 11,000 years finding out what that table looks like. Sel looked at me for a long time. His light pulsed once, very bright, and then settled back to its normal level. I am going to transmit your exact words to the conquered General Assembly, he said. Verbatim, unedited with full context. Please do, I said. He activated his transmitter. I turned back to my team. Leon was eating again, which I took as a sign that the crisis level had dropped to manageable. Kevin had his arms crossed and his eyes open. Lena was looking at her notes. Nadia was looking at the ceiling, which meant she was calculating structural stress tolerances for no reason anyone had asked her to, because that is what Nadia does when she is waiting. Clara was looking at me. Did that work? She said quietly. We will know in a few minutes, I said. The response from the conquered General Assembly arrived 11 minutes later. 34 civilizations, each one requiring committee consensus, 11 minutes. Fastest vote in conquered history. 6 months later, I was sitting at a table with 31 chairs. They had offered us 31 seats during the original membership negotiation, which I still do not entirely understand, and which nobody at the Concord has explained to my satisfaction. I suspect it was partly genuine accommodation and partly a face-saving measure. If you give the apex inherent civilization 31 seats, you can tell your member species that you were being generous rather than that you were afraid to say no. I accepted 3. I have always found that 3 is a number that communicates confidence without appearing to want anything in particular. Our 3 representatives at the Concord General Assembly table were myself, Lena Marsh, and Kevin Acaffer, who had been selected for this role on the grounds that he had fallen asleep during the initial briefing and woken up with perfect situational awareness, which the Concord Medical Review Board found deeply unsettling and which I found deeply practical. Kevin had also, in the 6 months since the archive mission, become something of a quiet legend in Concord diplomatic circles, entirely without trying. He had a way of saying very simple things in a very steady voice at exactly the right moment, which turned out to be a skill that 11,000 years of galactic diplomacy had undervalued, possibly because it requires a kind of patience that most species associate with not caring, and that Kevin associates with waiting for the moment when a simple truth is louder than a complicated argument. He was asleep in his chair when the formal induction ceremony began. He woke up with 4 seconds to spare and delivered his acknowledgement speech in 2 sentences, which the assembly then spent 40 minutes discussing the implications of, so I think it worked out. Lena cried during the ceremony. Twice. She denied it both times. The first time, she said she had dust in her eyes, which might have been believable except that the assembly chamber has no dust because, It is a sealed environment with a controlled atmosphere maintained at precise Concord standards. The second time she said she was just tired, which everyone accepted because Lena had slept approximately 4 hours per night for the preceding 6 months, and had produced, in that time, a complete working translation of the archive's war records, a comparative analysis of all 8 unmeasured designations and their outcomes, and a preliminary grammar framework for a language that had been dead for 4 million years. She was tired. She also cried at the induction ceremony. Both things were true. The archive had changed things, though not in the way I had expected. I had expected the conquered to treat it as a warning. 34 civilizations, each with their own historians and analysts, reviewing a record of the last time something like this had happened, seemed like a set of circumstances that would produce caution and distance. Instead, it produced curiosity. Not from all of them, and not all at once. It built slowly, the way trust builds, which is to say uncertainly and with several reversals before it found its direction. But the archive had done something that 6 decades of human diplomacy had not quite managed. It had given the conquered a framework for us that was older than the conquered itself. We were not new, the archive said. We were not unprecedented. We were the 9th, which meant we were recognizable, which meant we had a place in a history that the galaxy had been writing long before any current member species had learned to read. The unmeasured had always existed. The galaxy had learned to fear them, and then to quarantine them, and the quarantine had not ultimately worked, as I had pointed out to Cell in that corridor, in the way that pointing out the obvious is sometimes the most useful thing a person can do. But the archive had also recorded something else, something Lena found in the deepest layer of carvings, the oldest section, the part written before the war had started rather than after it had been decided. The builders had a word for what they hoped the unpredictable civilizations could become, given the right conditions, not contained, not managed. Incorporated. It was a different kind of word, not a solution or a category or a restriction, more like a question asked in advance by people who understood that some things could not be answered until the right moment arrived. The conquered spent a considerable amount of time discussing that word. Humanity spent a considerable amount of time quietly expanding into 3 new outer systems, which we had informed the conquered of in advance, with full navigational data and an open invitation for conquered observers, which 6 member species had accepted, and which had produced exactly 1 diplomatic incident. When Leon Petrov had offered a Sethani observer a protein bar, and the Sethani had considered this a formal declaration of resource alliance, and had taken 3 weeks to formally accept before eating it. Leon keeps the formal acceptance document framed in his quarters. He says it is the most meaningful diplomatic achievement of his career. He is, in some ways that I have never been able to fully define, genuinely correct. The night before the formal induction ceremony, Cell found me in the corridor outside the assembly hall. I was standing at a long observation window. It looked out over the planet the conquered had built their assembly complex on, a world of careful cities and old forests, and a sky that turned 3 different colors at sunset because of particulates in the upper atmosphere that had been there since before the first conquered member species had developed language. I had been standing there with a cup of coffee, which I had managed to procure from the human quarters block, for approximately 40 minutes. Cell moved to stand beside me. His light was warm and steady, the easy blue of someone who is comfortable, which I had learned to distinguish from his formal blue and his uncertain blue, and the cool, switched-off grief I had seen in the archive corridor. We stood there for a while without saying anything, which after 6 months of working together had become a comfortable way to be in the same space. "I have to ask you something," he said eventually. "All right." "I have been thinking about it since the archive," he said, "since the corridor." I waited. When you decided to go into the structure, he said, without full data, without certainty about the interior conditions, knowing the conquered had collectively chosen not to enter. Yes. Were you afraid? He said. The city below the window was lit up in long, warm lines. Traffic patterns, I had been told, though the vehicles that produced them were too distant to see individually from here. Just the light they left behind, moving in patterns that looked almost like something meaningful when viewed from a great enough height. Yes, I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then why did you go in? He said. I held the coffee cup with both hands. The heat through the ceramic was a small, ordinary thing, the kind of thing that is easy to overlook, easy to forget, easy to stop noticing when you are standing at an alien window 600 light years from home, trying to answer a question that a being of light and limbs and patience has been building toward for 6 months. I thought about Helena Vega, who had died finding the edge of this region of space, and would have laughed at having a dead star system named after her. I thought about the Kepler-12. I thought about their names, which I carry but do not say, in the same way you carry certain things, not displayed, not forgotten, just present, always present, the weight of them part of how you understand your own balance. I thought about a translation device, looping in 17 languages on a dead diplomat's desk at 400 hours. We were afraid, I said, and we went anyway. Cell waited. There is a gap, I said, between the moment you understand the risk and the moment you step toward it anyway. Humans live in that gap. We always have. We built everything we have ever built from inside that gap, our first fires, our first cities, our first ships. Every time we pointed at something we did not understand and decided to go find out what it was. I looked out at the city, at the lines of light moving in patterns too large to read from ground level. We are not fearless, I said. We are afraid constantly. The gap is full of fear, but standing still for us has always felt like a different kind of danger, a slower one, and so we go. Cell was quiet for a long time. His light did the warm thing it does when he is thinking about something that has adjusted his understanding of the world. That, he said softly, is what our models could not capture. I know, I said. We built models for hostility, for aggression, for ambition, and for desperation. We built models for civilizations that expanded because they needed resources, or because they feared other civilizations, or because their leadership demanded it. And we did not fit any of them, I said. You expand, he said, because you are afraid of not expanding, not of us, not of failure, just of the static, of the stopped. Something like that, I said. He made a sound that his translation device rendered as a soft affirmative, though I had learned from Lena that the original Vekani word was closer to. I have been carrying an incorrect assumption about this for a very long time, and I am setting it down now. I am being rotated to a new posting next week, he said. The Assembly has assigned me to the Outer Monitoring Network. That is a significant position, I said. I requested it, he said. I want to understand what we missed the first time, not in the models, in the way we were looking. He paused. I think we were looking for something that was already a threat. We did not look for something that was simply going. Going, I said. Moving forward, he said. Without calculation, not recklessly, just forward because backward is not a direction you find acceptable. I finished the coffee. The three-colored sunset was beginning at the far edge of the horizon, the first color a deep, warm amber that moved upward slowly from the ground, the way all good light does, rising rather than falling. Take care of yourself out there, I said. I will, he said, Commander. He turned to leave. Cell. He stopped. Thank you, I said, for telling me the truth in the corridor about the vote. You did not have to do that. His light pulsed once, warm, full, brief. You are apex inherent, he said. I thought you deserved to know what you were walking into. He walked away down the corridor, his 6 limbs moving in their careful, measured rhythm, his light casting a soft, moving blue across the walls, and then he turned a corner and was gone. I stood at the window for a while longer. The ceremony was in 8 hours, 3 seats at the table, humanity's first formal place in 35,000 years of recorded galactic history. Lena would cry. Kevin would sleep through part of it and wake up saying exactly the right thing. Leon would find the commissary. I would shake hands with 34 civilizations and say polite, appropriate things, and somewhere in the ceremony there would be a moment, probably quiet, probably small, when I would think about the Kepler-12 and the gap between fear and going, and the fact that we had lived in that gap so long we had stopped seeing it as extraordinary. It was not extraordinary. It was just what we were. The conquered spent 4,000 years developing a new category to describe it. We had always had a word. We just called it Tuesday. I set the empty cup down on the window ledge. The amber of the sunset was giving way to the second color now, a pale green that moved through the clouds in long, slow waves. 4:17 hours. New day. I walked back inside,